stand back. This is one that you don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. You got Alex Cowboy Oliveira taking on Peter Sobotta. And what can I say? I mean, Oliveira was on a 3-fight losing streak not that long ago. And I get it. The names are pretty good. We're talking about the Dalbys. And then before that, we're talking about a tough test and a tough out of Mike Perry.
Fight of the night.
And then Gunnar Nelson where he got finished. And in his last fight, he won a split decision over Max Griffin. So it is what it is. I mean, that's a terribly overused saying, but it's true. In his fight against Max Griffin, again, I get it, split decision, but it was really close. It was back and forth. Did it look like the Cowboy Oliveira of old? Maybe not. So you have to worry. I mean, is Oliveira declining at this point? He's had a ton of fights. He's had a lot of weird stuff in his personal life. And he's taking on Peter Sobotta, a guy who hasn't won a fight in 3 years. And I get it. He was on a 2-fight win streak at one point. Nicholas Dalby was one of them. And then in his last time out, he lost. But that was 2 years ago. So
to Leon Edwards, too, who is arguably the number 1 contender for a title right now.
We haven't seen Peter Sobotta in a while. And he's a guy, jiu-jitsu black belt. He's got a lot of wins under his belt. He had 3 in the same night, and one of them was decent, but the other was against a guy who was 0-1 and 1-0. And then he got a shot back in the UFC. And that was, 2014 when he came back for his second stint in the UFC? If you want to see a wild fight, and it was down under, I believe it was Mark Hunt and the second fight with Bigfoot Silva. He got body kick finished.
Oh, it was Ronda Rousey, Holly Holm.
That was it. UFC 193. Regardless, Peter Sobotta, weird journey in his MMA career, and it's tough to tell exactly what you're going to get. I know I talked about it early on. Peter Sobotta has a teammate on this fight, fighting early on. It's tough to know what you're going to get out of both guys. Alex Oliveira, for what it's worth, he's decent on the ground, but he gets in bad positions. I mean, the Gunnar Nelson fight was a good example of it. Go ahead.
Okay, but in bad positions, if you mean he got his face completely basically cut in half, that's the only time that I've kind of regretted that I love MMA as much as I do. Because I saw that elbow and all the blood, and I'm like, maybe John McCain was right. Now, of course, I don't believe that now. But at the time, that's one of those brutal finishes just in MMA history that's kind of been forgotten. Because Gunnar Nelson gets in full mount. We know how good Gunnar Nelson's ground game is. So to be submitted by a guy like that, there's no shame in it. Gets in a full mount, throws one elbow that just surgically slashes Oliveira's face in half. And he just starts spewing out blood. It was very bad. And then after that fight, I don't want to say that's the fight that kind of changed him moving forward, but I thought he came back a little too early against Mike Perry because that fight wasn't very long after the Nelson loss. And after a really grueling loss like that where you take a lot of damage, you need an extended layoff. You need that, 6, 8, 9 month layoff until you can even think about coming back. But I'm pretty sure the Mike Perry fight was that spring, and the Nelson fight happened in December. So it was really a quick turnaround for him. And he didn't look to be all there. And it seems like just those 2 fights have kind of halted his progress ever since, because it wasn't that long ago when he had arguably one of the greatest fights ever against Yancy Medeiros, and people were really speaking highly of Alex Cowboy Oliveira. He had fought in an earlier on main event in his career against the other Cowboy, Donald Cerrone, and Cerrone's, I should say, in his welterweight debut when he had kind of gone on his run there. So Alex Oliveira's had a really, I won't say a really celebrated career, but he's been one of those guys who, if you follow the UFC at all, he's a recognizable name just because you know what you're going to get with him. You're going to get an exciting fight. He's going to be dancing out there all fancy to his to the cage. He's going to put on an exciting one. Peter Sobotta is kind of the opposite, a guy who not really known for his activity, whereas Oliveira, for better or for worse, he's been extremely active throughout his career. And with Sobotta, I've never really known what I should see from him, because I remember that Ben Saunders fight, because at one point Alexander Gustafsson was number 1 in my books. And I was so excited for that Glover main event. And that fight turned out to be good. And then it went real south for Gustin afterwards. But Sobotta against Ben Saunders. And Ben Saunders in 2017, we knew his chin was questionable, but we didn't know to what extent. He was still able to win fights. And Peter Sobotta went out there and just kind of beat the brakes off poor Ben Saunders. And on the ground, too, he was really able to hold his own against Saunders, which wasn't something that we'd seen up until that point. Because the way that you beat Ben Saunders was you knock him out. Not a lot of guys were able to, go...
Ben Saunders is a good ground fighter. I know, you might recency bias, Ben Saunders sucks, but there was a point in time in Bellator where Ben Saunders was the it thing, and that's why he ended up in the UFC again.
Exactly. And then Douglas Lima kind of changed his life for the worse, but I'm sure there's other guys out there with that same story. I'm excited for this fight. It's just there's so many question marks around it. And this is how I think I can best simplify it. Either Alex Oliveira is going to finish Peter Sobotta, or he's going to make a mistake that gets himself finished. I don't think Peter Sobotta is going to go out there and really be searching for the finish in this fight. I don't think he's going to go out there throwing wild bombs from the get-go.
I think he's looking for a finish. He's looking to submit him.
I think he might be, but I don't really think he's going to be attacking it all that much. I think he's going to try to wrestle, try to wear out Oliveira, and then see what avenues open up from that point going forward. I really think it's going to come down to, is Alex Oliveira going to be using that really nice snap front kick that we know he had used in the past part of his career? Because Oliveira, at his best, he stands kind of like Wonder Boy, but doesn't really use the same tools. He has that wide stance. He's going to throw a lot of push kicks, a lot of front kicks at the middle. It really makes things tough for you because when you're trying to block punches like this, all of Oliveira's attacks are coming up the middle, up the middle, up the middle. He's got that brutal uppercut that we saw in the Ryan LaFleur fight. And Ryan LaFleur, I know he's retired now, but at one point was undefeated. His only loss had been to Demian Maia. And then Alex Oliveira went out there and just kind of danced a lot, hit one uppercut, and knocked him completely out at the start of the second round. So I think Oliveira is the much more likely to get a finish in this fight. And I am going to favor him. But the only reason I'm favoring Oliveira at this point in his career is because Peter Sobotta, we haven't seen win it. Well, yeah, we haven't really seen win a fight or even win a round in 3 meaningful years.
And it's a lot different from last weekend. You had Joe Duffy and Joel Alvarez. And you'd seen Alvarez fight, and you could see, method of victory for Alvarez. And I'm not saying that we know everything. Because, again, we said Molly McCann was going to beat Tyler Santos overwhelmingly. And we were totally wrong there.
Oh.
Jacasey to beat Fiziev. And he lost there.
I said Calvin Gastelum was going to beat the brakes off Jack Hermanson.
And I said Hermanson was going to submit him. So I got that right. But we had Joel Alvarez to beat Joe Duffy because with Duffy, he had won since Reza Madadi back in 2017. Peter Sobotta, the last win over Ben Saunders, who's not with the UFC anymore. And that was in 2017. Before that, a big win over Nicholas Dalby. But you can't go that far back without kind of starting to discount things. I mean, Sobotta, the last time we saw him out, he lost. I get it. Again, it was 2 years and 4 months ago to Leon Edwards, who looks like a world beater now. And Oliveira had that 3-fight losing streak, and he beat Max Griffin barely. So if you look over on Tapology, 878 votes, 86% going with Oliveira, 47% by decision, 13% submission, 35% by knockout. He's not going to submit Peter Sobotta, I can tell you that right now. And then if you look at the odds, I like where they're at. They're close, minus 170 for Oliveira. Sobotta coming back at a plus 145 underdog. It's a fight I would stay away from because there's so many question marks and unknowns. The pick being not the most confident, I would say that Oliveira wins this one if he can keep it standing and if he can at least somewhat wrestle. And I know against Dalby he wasn't able to do that, but in this one, if he can at least stay busy, he should be able to win. But that's the least confident pick on this card.
Exactly. It's not like either one of these guys are going to fight, Santiago Ponzinibbio. Oh, it's a weird name to pull out. But like a Ponzinibbio guy, a Magny guy. Like, I don't want to see either one of these guys in the top 15 for a while now. Oliveira needs a lot to prove that he belongs back in that realm that he was once in because it wasn't that long ago. And I say not that long ago. I know it was like 3 years at this point, but still, it was within recent memory that Oliveira did have a number next to his name. And that means a lot in the welterweight division when you look outside of the top 15, how many talented guys there are there. So I think Oliveira is the higher upside of these two, even though at this stage of both guys' career, Oliveira is only 32, but in MMA years, he's 75 and a half. Like, he's getting up there because every single one of his fights, he has taken quite a bit of damage. He's not afraid to get in those types of dog fights, and for that reason, I'm going to say Oliveira gets it done against Sobotta. I think it should be a fairly entertaining fight, though.
It should be. Both going with Alex Oliveira, but scratch that one from your card. Really looking forward to this one. We have 14 other previews here for this card, including an extended look at Robert Whittaker and Darren Till in the main event. Keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say.
Let's
get into it.